All right, so if we were in the classroom, I would be doing a group exercise. And what I want you to think of is I want you to think of manufacturing overhead, if you guys can see my bucket here. I want you to think of manufacturing overhead as all the overhead costs, and I want you to think of they're all in one bucket, right? And all these costs, this is my $100 play money, all these costs total $900,000. In a traditional costing system, right, what we do is we take our estimated overhead cost and we divide by either machine hours, direct labor hours, or direct labor cost to come up with that predetermined overhead rate. In our previous example, we said it was $30 per direct labor hour, and we will allocate manufacturing overhead to the products or to the jobs based on direct labor hours. All right, what I want you to think of is that each $100 bill, and I would typically give these out to students, has a cost on it. Right, the one I'm looking at right now says depreciation. I don't know if you guys can see this. Depreciation on manufacturing equipment. This one here has salaries of engineers, electricity for the factory, and purchasing software. All right, but you get the gist of it. So each $100 bill, and again, every student would get one of these dollar bills or $100 bills, and each of them represent a different overhead cost. All right, the first thing that we're going to do in activity-based costing is to identify cost pools. In this example, we've identified 5 cost pools: manufacturing, setup, purchasing, product development, and property and plant. All right, so again, I want you to think of that $900,000 that was included in the manufacturing overhead bucket, so to speak, is now going to get allocated to 5 cost pools, or if you want to think of it as buckets. Again, so that 900,000, of that 900, 500,000 is manufacturing cost, 100,000 is setup cost, 50,000 is purchasing cost, 200,000 product development, and 50 is the plant and property. If you add up those amounts, it equals $900,000. All right, once you've identified your cost pool, the next thing that we need to do is identify a cost driver. Right? Again, going back to that traditional costing system, we use machine hours, direct labor hours, or direct labor cost, and allocated our manufacturing overhead based on one of those 3. In activity-based costing, each cost pool will have its own unique cost driver. Again, you want to select a cost driver that has a strong correlation to those costs, or I like to think of it as that cost driver is what's driving that cost. So going back to our manufacturing cost, our first cost pool, right, we've identified machine hours as being the appropriate cost driver. But let's take a look at setup cost. And I want you to think of setup costs as the costs that are involved when they set up or get the machines ready for the runs. Again, if you want to think of them going from producing peanut M&Ms to just regular chocolate, they're going to have to change or calibrate those machinery slightly different because of the manufacturing of the products, right? Again, we have chocolate versus chocolate and peanuts. All right, so there's cost associated with the different setups. Purchasing orders or purchasing costs. Again, what's driving that department or that cost pool is going to be the number of purchase orders. When it comes to product development, I want you to think of this as your engineering group. Again, and what's driving this cost is going to be how many products you're developing, how many products you're improving. Right? And then finally, that last bucket, which is our property and our plant and property cost. And again, that one, I think they've identified it as square footage. Again, I can't see it, it's behind my video. But again, you're trying to identify that cost driver that correlates to those costs. Again, what I like to think of is going to drive those costs. Each cost driver, or once you establish that cost pool, you're going to use that cost driver, and I like to think of it as a mini predetermined overhead rate. So what I want you to think of is that with each cost pool, again, you have manufacturing cost, we have $500,000. We're going to use machine hours, right, to come up with, and again, we call it an activity-based overhead rate. Again, I want you to think of each cost pool will have its own predetermined overhead rate. Again, we don't call it that, but that's essentially what it is. All right, once we come up with that activity-based overhead rate, at that point, we can actually allocate the overhead to the product. Each activity cost pool will have its own activity cost pool or its own activity overhead rate.